The glass-walled boardroom shimmered with the morning light reflecting off Manhattan's skyline. I had been in this room 100 times before, usually with quiet confidence, prepared to present the operational updates that kept Hayes Tech running. But today, the air was different. Tense. Expectant. Charles Hayes, our CEO and founder, sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly combed, eyes tired. To his right lounged his son, Tyler, in an expensive navy suit he hadn't earned, a permanent smirk curling his lips. He clicked the remote and a slide appeared on the massive screen, a red X over a contract labeled $5,000 hazard lost, and beneath it, in bold font, approved by Jennifer Aniston. I felt my stomach drop. Tyler leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's useless. Messed everything up, just fire her." The words echoed against the glass. A few board members shifted in their seats. One coughed into his fist. I caught the flicker of discomfort on Patricia from Legal's face, but no one spoke. My eyes darted to Charles, hoping for some recognition, some defense. He remained still. Hands folded, a storm brewing behind his calm expression. I inhaled slowly, forcing myself to remain composed. I wasn't about to give Tyler the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I studied the slide and let my gaze shift to the far corner of the room. A man in a gray suit, Hayes Tech's outside counsel, was already holding a folder on his lap, his attention locked on Tyler, not me. The smirk that passed between them was quick but clear. This was premeditated. Heat rose in my cheeks, but I managed a small, polite nod. "I see," I said, my voice even, as if I were acknowledging a quarterly update instead of a public execution. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap, my knuckles tight enough to ache. Around the table, the board members avoided my eyes. Manhattan stretched out beyond the glass, indifferent to my humiliation. For 8 years, I had built this company's backbone, worked nights, saved contracts, shielded us from disasters no one else could handle. And this was my reward. Tyler leaned back in his chair, basking in his moment of triumph. He had no idea that his smirk had just lit a fire I didn't even know I still had. I straightened in my seat, silent, and let one thought settle firmly in my mind: never again. The meeting droned on, numbers and projections blurring into background noise as I memorized every smirk, every glance, every subtle betrayal in that room, and began calculating my next move. I left the boardroom with my pulse hammering in my ears, the Manhattan skyline flashing like shards of glass through the elevator's glass panels. By the time the doors opened into the lobby, my face was composed, but inside, I was burning. No one stopped me. No one met my eyes. I walked out into the chilled morning air, my heels clicking across the marble floor of the lobby, each step a drumbeat of silent rage. By the time I reached my apartment, perched on the 12th floor of a narrow building in the East Village, the city's noise had become a dull hum. I locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling for the first time since the meeting. My laptop waited on the kitchen counter, its blue notification light pulsing in the dim room. I opened my inbox almost on instinct, and there it was, a chain of emails Tyler had forwarded for my awareness. I scrolled, and the truth crystallized into something cold and sharp. He had forged my signature on the contract approval, the very deal he'd blamed me for losing. My initials, my title, all copied onto a PDF that I hadn't touched. My humiliation in that boardroom hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been an ambush. I sank into my chair, the room spinning for a moment before settling into stillness. My gaze fell on the sketch pad that had been lying on the edge of my desk for months, edges curling, a fine layer of dust coating the cover. I used to spend my nights drawing portraits, cityscapes, anything that felt like mine. Hayes Tech had swallowed that part of me whole. 8 years of staying late, fixing crises no one else could solve, mentoring Tyler even when he couldn't remember basic protocols. 8 years of loyalty that now meant nothing. The humiliation that had seared my chest began to cool, hardening into something precise and deliberate. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I closed the email, opened a new folder, and began saving copies of everything. My fingers were steady now, and with each click, the fear dissolved into a clarity I hadn't felt in years. By the time the city lights flickered on outside my window, I knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself they had tried to erase. Night had swallowed the city by the time I powered up the old external hard drive I hadn't touched in years. The soft hum of my laptop filled the apartment, mingling with the distant wail of sirens and the steady pulse of New York traffic below, file by file, folder by folder. My history with Hayes Tech unfolded on the screen, a quiet testament to the years I'd spent building someone else's empire. There it was, my name stamped across the company's backbone. Automation protocols, cybersecurity frameworks, vendor control systems. My digital fingerprint was everywhere, woven into the skeleton of the company like steel rods in concrete. And there, in the legal folder I'd nearly forgotten about, were the patent certificates. Every one of them bore my signature, side by side with Charles Hayes's, filed years ago before Tyler ever wore a suit. I scrolled through the vendor agreements next, a dozen, then 24, all with clauses requiring my authorization for renewal or termination. Without me, shipments stalled, service providers froze access. The company could hum along for maybe a week before grinding to a halt. A slow, deliberate breath left my lungs. They had humiliated me in front of the board, treated me like a disposable accessory. But in truth, the company's lifeblood still ran through my hands. Then I saw the document I'd been half hoping I'd imagined the termination clause buried in my original contract. If the company tried to dismiss me without just cause, it triggered a board-level legal review and temporarily froze the execution of certain contracts. The clause had been my lawyer's idea, a small protection in a sea of risk. I had almost forgotten it existed. The city lights glittered through my window like shards of a broken mirror, each reflection a reminder of what I had lost and what I still held. The humiliation of the morning no longer burned. It had crystallized into something sharper, cleaner. I closed my laptop gently and let the darkness of the room settle around me, my own reflection staring back in the glass. They thought I was already gone, erased with a single slide in a boardroom. But I was still here, and I had just found the first thread to pull. The rooftop steakhouse glittered against the Manhattan skyline, a picture of wealth and power. Heat lamps flickered in the evening air, and the glass walls reflected the city lights like a second world. I sat at the far end of the polished table, the smell of seared filet mingling with expensive wine, listening as Tyler held court. "Jennifer's been with the company forever," he said with a laugh that carried across the terrace. "But, some people just get obsolete. It happens." Laughter rippled around the table. A few of the clients gave me sympathetic glances. Others avoided my eyes entirely. Tyler, glowing under the warm rooftop lights, went on claiming credit for system upgrades I had designed, projects I had saved from collapse. Every word was a twist of the knife, but I didn't flinch. I sipped my water and let him think he was winning. By the time I returned to my apartment, the night was deep, and the city hummed beneath my window. I opened my laptop and felt the jolt of recognition my company credentials had been locked. Tyler had wasted no time. He wanted me gone, not just from the boardroom, but from the digital backbone of Hayes Tech, erased like I had never existed. A slow smile curved my lips. He had no idea. I still had admin access from a long-forgotten security update, a hidden key he didn't know existed. Within minutes, I was back inside the system, moving through directories like a ghost in my own house. I copied every incriminating email, contract, and system log, dragging them into a secure folder on my encrypted drive. Tyler's forged approvals, his reckless changes, his attempts to bury my work, they were all mine now. The city lights bounced off my screen, and in the glass I saw my own reflection calm, razor-focused, a woman no longer cornered but quietly dangerous. By the time the clock neared midnight, the last file finished copying. I closed the laptop with care, the hum of the hard drive fading into silence. The pieces were finally in place, and the next move would be mine. Charles's assistant called me just after 9, her voice careful. The CEO would like to see you in his office. Alone. I knew what that meant. Tyler had made his move. When I stepped into the glass-walled office on the top floor, the Manhattan skyline stretched behind Charles like a silent jury. He stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, a man torn between blood and business. On the desk lay a blank termination form, its edges crisp against the polished mahogany. "Jennifer," he began, voice low but tight. "Tyler has serious concerns about your reliability. He wants this resolved quickly." I walked forward without rushing, my heels clicking softly against the marble. From my bag, I pulled out a leather-bound folder and placed it on the desk. "Before you make any decision," I said evenly, "you should see this." He hesitated, then opened the folder, one by one. The pages told the story he had chosen not to see. First, the original patents, filed under my name, the very systems Hayes Tech depended on to function. Next, printed email chains, complete with metadata, showing Tyler forging my approval on the failed contract and attempting to erase my access from the system. Finally, a single sheet with my original contract, the termination clause highlighted in yellow. If the company removed me without due process, key vendor agreements and operational licenses would freeze, triggering a mandatory board review. I watched his eyes move across each page, his posture stiffening with every revelation. By the time he reached the last document, his face had gone pale. "Good God," he muttered. I met his gaze. "Calm and steady. If anyone's signing termination papers," I said, sliding the form back toward him, "it won't be me." The office was silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Charles leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision pressing visibly on his shoulders. He wasn't just staring at an employee anymore. He was looking at the person holding the company's pulse in her hands. I turned toward the door, leaving the folder where it lay, knowing the next step would change everything. The next morning, the air in the CEO's office felt heavier than the day before. Charles sat behind his desk, the folder I had left now resting open like a quiet accusation. Tyler stormed in moments later, his voice already rising. "She's lying. Dad. She's been sabotaging me for months." I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out the termination papers Charles had prepared. "You wanted these signed," I said softly, "so let's make sure the right person signs off today." Charles's eyes flicked between us, his jaw tight. He said nothing as I slid the papers across the desk. Tyler leaned over, reading, his face draining of color when he realized his own name filled the termination line. "Breach of ethics," I said evenly, tapping the first line. "Forgery of internal approvals, sabotage of core operations by attempting to erase my access, and the risk you've caused to Hayes Tech's reputation, documented and undeniable." "You can't do this," he shouted, voice cracking as he looked to his father. "Dad, tell her fix this." But Charles stayed silent, his hand resting over his mouth. the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down. Security arrived at the door, their presence calm but final, when they stepped forward. Tyler backed away in disbelief. "You'll regret this," he yelled, his voice echoing down the hallway as he was escorted out, suit jacket half slipping from his shoulder. I watched without a word. There was no thrill in his fall, no gloating satisfaction, only the cold, steady awareness that this was the consequence he had written for himself. When the office door clicked shut, I returned the papers to the desk, initials neatly in place where they needed to be. "Operations will continue as usual," I said, turning to leave. The real battle was no longer about a single firing. It was moving to the boardroom, where the company's future and my own would be decided. The storm clouds outside the glass walls made the boardroom feel like a pressure chamber. Rain streaked down the windows, Manhattan, a blur of silver and gray. Every seat at the long mahogany table was filled, the tension sharp enough to cut through the hum of the HVAC. I stood at the head of the table with a folder of documents, each page a weapon I had sharpened over the last 48 hours, without a tremor in my hands. I placed the first stack before the board members the original incorporation files, my signature side by side with Charles Hayes's, proof that I had been more than an employee, I'd been a founder in all but title. Next came the timeline of my contributions, the automation systems, cybersecurity protocols, and vendor deals that had saved the company more than $20 million. Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table as I flipped to the next section. The final stack silenced the room. Tyler's misconduct, emails with forged approvals, system logs showing his attempts to delete my access, and the failed $5 million deal he had pinned on me. I let the weight of the evidence settle before speaking. "I signed the termination papers," I said, my voice steady, the storm punctuating my words with distant thunder, just not mine. A heavy silence fell. Charles sat at the far end, his face pale, fingers tapping once on the table before he exhaled and looked at the board. "I will step down as CEO," he said finally, voice low but resolute. "For the stability of Hayes Tech, Jennifer will serve as interim COO effective immediately. The company's survival depends on it." No one argued. A few heads nodded. Others stayed frozen. But the decision was done. I gathered my folders and stepped back, feeling the shift in the air as authority settled on my shoulders. As I walked out of the boardroom, the rain outside eased into a quiet drizzle, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the company's future and my own resting entirely in my hands. Sunlight poured into my new corner office, warm and clean, a sharp contrast to the cold glass rooms where I had once felt invisible. A row of plants lined the window ledge, and two of my sketches pieces I had drawn in rare moments of freedom hung on the wall behind my desk. The room felt alive, like a declaration that this space belonged to me. The first weeks as interim COO were a whirlwind. I tore down the bloated reporting structures Tyler had insisted on, streamlined approvals, and rebuilt the operations pipeline. More than anything, I wanted to create a culture where competence thrived over ego. As part of that vision, I launched a mentorship program for young women in tech. Seeing their excitement during the first orientation filled me with a satisfaction no board meeting had ever given me. Late one evening, as the last of the city's light faded beyond the windows, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before opening the voicemail. "Jennifer? It's Tyler. I need your help. Nobody will take my calls. They're saying I'm blacklisted. You can fix this. Please call me back." I stared at the phone for a moment, then pressed delete. My hand didn't even tremble. There was no anger left in me, no satisfaction in hearing his desperation, just clarity. He had written his story, and I had finally started writing mine. As weeks passed, the office walls began to reflect not just my work, but my identity artwork from my evenings, thank you cards from mentees, and a small model of the company's first server I had kept after a long-ago upgrade. Each item reminded me that I wasn't erasing the past. I was reclaiming it. The day I officially signed the documents finalizing my promotion to COO, I felt no need to gloat or announce anything grand. My greatest victory wasn't in Tyler's fall or the company's applause. It was in finally owning the narrative of my life. I shut off the office lights that evening, my reflection in the window calm and steady, knowing the next choice I made would shape the life I truly wanted. The boardroom was quiet when the vote concluded, the weight of the decision settling like a stone in my chest. Charles had already vacated his seat, and now every pair of eyes turned toward me. "Jennifer," the chairman said, his tone almost reverent. "The board would like you to assume the permanent CEO position. Hayes Tech needs a steady hand, and after everything you've done, there's no one better." The words should have thrilled me. Power, recognition, vindication, all within reach. Yet as I nodded politely and accepted the packet of formal documents, a strange heaviness filled me. The skyline beyond the windows was dazzling in the afternoon sun, but for the first time, I wondered if I wanted to spend my life in this room at all. That night, I returned to my apartment and found an email waiting in my inbox, the sender name making my stomach tighten. Tyler Hayes, joining Apex Systems. They want Hayes Tech's client list. I can get them the numbers if you buy me out quietly. Otherwise, good luck when they come for you. I sat back, staring at the screen. With one move, I could crush him completely. A single call, and his career and any chance of redemption would evaporate forever. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but instead of anger, I felt a deep, hollow ache. In the reflection of my window, I saw the woman I'd almost become cold, vengeful, consumed by the same hunger for control that had ruined Tyler. Then I glanced at the sketchpad on my desk, the lines of a half-finished cityscape waiting patiently for me. I gathered the evidence, packaged it, and sent it anonymously to the federal regulators. Justice would come, but it would not wear my name. When I finally closed my laptop, the silence of the apartment felt different, lighter, like I'd set something down I didn't need to carry anymore. The CEO contract still sat in my bag, unsigned, as I turned toward the part of my life I'd nearly forgotten how to claim. A year later, the rhythm of my life felt like a song I had finally chosen for myself. I had stepped down from Hayes Tech months after stabilizing it, handing the reins to a leadership team that valued results over ego. My name still sat on the patents, but the company no longer defined me. I lived in a sunlit loft in Brooklyn now, high ceilings and brick walls lined with my own paintings, canvases leaned against shelves filled with tech prototypes, and the faint scent of turpentine mixed with the quiet hum of 3D printers. By day, I ran my small consultancy, advising startups on operational strategy. By night, I turned the loft into a creative mentorship space for women launching their first ventures, my world's art and technology. Logic and expression had finally fused into something that felt whole. That evening, the gallery buzzed with conversation and soft jazz as my latest exhibit opened. Black and white portraits of women in moments of transformation lined the walls, interspersed with vibrant cityscapes I'd painted during late nights when inspiration replaced exhaustion. I moved through the crowd, greeting collectors and friends, my heart calm, no longer racing with the need to prove anything. Near the center of the room, a young woman approached me, her voice shy but steady. "Are you Jennifer Aniston?" I smiled. "I am." She glanced at one of the portraits, a woman standing on a rooftop, wind catching her hair. "Your story inspired me," she said. "I left my toxic job last month. I start my own company tomorrow." For a moment, the noise of the gallery faded, replaced by a quiet warmth that settled deep in my chest. I reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "Then this," I said, gesturing to the walls around us, "is exactly why I do what I do." As I stepped back and watched her blend into the crowd, I felt no urge to look behind me at the company I had left, at the battles I had fought, or at the people who had once defined my worth. My legacy wasn't in the empire I had dismantled, but in the lives rebuilt from its shadow, including my own.